Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of Panzer, GMT Games' game of tactical combat in World War II. Now this is a game that emphasizes tank versus tank combat, and this core game, which is a third edition just recently republished in 2021, concentrates on Germans versus Russians on the Eastern Front. So let's jump in and take a look at the components and offer some initial impressions. So before we jump into the unboxing of this, I do have to say one thing that I think must be kind of designed out of respect to this original game here, because as soon as I saw Panzer, this version, I mean, this design, obviously it's subtly different, but I think it's paying homage to Panzer Blitz of old, which of course there are some similarities to this as well. I mean, Panzer Blitz had more, a counter was more than one armored vehicle. This is armored vehicle versus armored vehicle, but you get the idea. This has got to be intentional, right? So, and if you're not familiar with Panzer Blitz, it's an old Avalon Hill game covering armored combat on the Eastern Front in World War II. It's slightly different scale than this one, but I thought it is interesting because as soon as I saw Panzer, I thought of that game. So worth noting. Now this game is designed by James Day. A couple of things to mention about it too as we dig in. There are currently, in addition to this, what they call the basic game, kind of the core game, there are 4 expansions that expand the combat to the Western Front, add in some different elements. Expansion 4, as we'll talk a little bit about, adds solitaire play. So there's a lot of depth to this series that you can dig into once if you decide that you like this basic game. As well as, it should be worth mentioning that there is a new version, a new edition of the game. That's not an expansion. My understanding is it's a standalone version of the game covering armored combat in North Africa, and that should be out somewhat probably in the next, I think within the next year or so. I don't know the exact time scale. But this again is the 3rd edition printing, 2021. It's just recently released of the original game, which was released in 2012. So let's jump in and actually flip it over here and take a look at some of our helpful parameters here. And I'll show a close-up down here. And as always, I like to offer some initial impressions as to how I'm looking through it. And I've looked through the rules, I've opened this up, I've looked through the counters, and I've kind of spent a little bit of time with the game so far, maybe about an hour or so. Not enough to understand how to play it, but I'd like to kind of bring those to bear as we look at this. And that's the first thing I'd like to mention, because I think if we look at this complexity scale, the GMT complexity scale, and I'm starting to also, as I'm playing more GMT games, I have to confess, I'm starting to think I need to add a +1 to their complexity scale. But let me explain. In this case, I think a complexity scale of 6 is a little bit misleading. The reason is there's actually 3 levels to the game in this. There is a basic game, there's an advanced game, and then there's another optional rules rulebook that adds in actually some hefty components and some hefty mechanics into the game at the end. So oftentimes optional rules are kind of like an additional 5% or maybe 10% that are kind of like, oh, those are kind of cool little things that we don't really need. But the optional rules here add in a lot of really cool mechanics. There's a lot of heft to the optional system. And my point is then that this complexity rating of a 6, maybe it's a 7 if you added all those three things together. But from what I've seen, the basic game, I'm going to say it's more like a 4. That seems it seems pretty accessible, and we'll look at that as we get into it. Then as you get into the advanced game, I'm going to think that that's a 6 or 7, and maybe the adding in all the optional rules, when you finally get everything in the game, I think this is more like a 7 or an 8. So I don't know, maybe a 6 makes sense. I'm not really sure, but that's just kind of my general thoughts. And the big point, as we'll see on it too, is that I do think this is a very accessible game, much more so than I initially thought when I first purchased it. Now, the solitaire rating is a 6. That feels about right. I've looked through, there's some hidden rules, I think, that are added in as the optional rules at the very end, but you don't need them, and I don't think they really, you're not going to, with all the stuff that's in this system, you're not going to miss out much by not utilizing those hidden rules. They're such a small percentage of everything that's here, but I don't see anything really within this that would prevent a player from having a really good experience playing both sides of the forces as a solitaire experience. It's also worth noting too, as I mentioned those expansions, expansion number 4 has a solitaire system for the game as well. Now, I don't know much about what's in that. I don't know if it's a solitaire system that's designed for a certain type of scenarios, or you can take that solitaire system then and apply it to every scenario in the series. Those are kind of 2 different things, but it's worth noting that there are some solitaire rules that you can look into to perhaps raise this up a little bit more from its current level that they give it in. a 6 here. Now, a couple just a little things about scale. Every individual unit is an individual tank or towed gun, and then we have infantry squad. So it's kind of at that, that advanced squad leader type level. Each game turn is anywhere from 15 seconds to 15 minutes, and then the map is about 100 meters per hex. So you get kind of a rough idea. This is going to be kind of very much at that tactical level of engagement. So it's a pretty heavy box too. It's a 2-inch box, but it's packed with stuff and it is heavy. So let's open it up. Now I want to ask you one thing. If you're going to watch the next minute, watch the next 2 minutes, because this can be a little bit of a shock. Because when I open it up, okay, get this. I want to just show this to you. Okay, so here are the basic and advanced rules. And if we look at that, it's 68 pages. That's a pretty hefty package of rules, right? And then we have the playbook, which has the scenarios in it and other kinds of information. That's 40 pages. So now we're up to 108 pages. Now we're at the third printing here of the optional rules, which adds in another 24 pages of rules. And these are all rules and stuff, right? So you got 132 pages of documentation. Now, if you haven't freaked out yet, though, take a deep breath, because when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's going to be a heavy lift, right? But as we start, we're going to start by looking into these basic and advanced rules. Then I started playing around with the rule book, and here's where I think it gets really interesting. And as we do this always, I'll show up some kind of screenshots of these so you can get a closer look at them. Now, the thing that's really cool about it is that I think there's 3 things to be said, probably more, but at least 3 things to be said about the rules and the way they've structured the learning of the game. First of all, as I mentioned, there's a basic game, an advanced game, and then a optional rules at the end. And this rule book covers the basic and the advanced rules. But get this, the basic rules are the first 21 pages. So you've got a fully functional game system right here in the first 21 pages. Now, it only covers, the basic rules just covers armored vehicle combat. Because when you get into the advanced rules, you start to get things like aircraft, leg units, so infantry squads and stuff like that, and then mortars and flamethrowers and towed units and everything like that, and trucks and all kinds of stuff. So you get a lot of the full experience, perhaps is the best way to put it, by going beyond the basic rules, but you've got a fully functioning tank versus tank game by just learning 21 pages of rules. So that is pretty cool. Now, I think it's also worthwhile to get a sense of what this game is like, to kind of look through some of the key components and mechanics that are in the rules here. And I will say that this rule book and this experience looks to me like to be one of the most organized and efficient systems for learning a game, as well as coming back to it later and referencing the rules. Everything is cross-indexed. We've got a full kind of, if you would, kind of an index table of contents here for the rule book, so it's really easy to find stuff that way. And if we go to the end here, we'll take a look just now at the end, we have a full index of all of the concepts in the game. So with this much documentation, you're going to have to look up stuff to play the game, right? You're just going to forget stuff and you have to look it up. This makes it so easy to do that, as well as a full 2-page glossary for all the abbreviations, which is really handy as well. So let's jump in. The other thing I will say too is that I think these rules are some of the clearest rules I have ever seen in wargaming. Now, the real test comes when you play it, but of course, lots of colors, lots of images. I'll show some close-ups here. Lots of really clear explanations, very easy to read, very easy to figure out. I've looked through a number of sections on the rules, and I've read through them, and I wanted to show you one here. Like here, this is a game that has line of sight, right? So you have to determine whether one unit can see the other unit. All of the conditions are just spelled out right here. Clear image with a clear example. I read through the whole thing. I think this is the best explanation of line of sight I've ever seen in a war game. I just read it. It's like, that's totally makes sense. I totally get it. And you know where you would need to look if you forgot any of these things too. So we got Overwatch Fire, a lot of the different basic concepts that you can imagine would be in the game here. Really clear explanations with graphics to kind of put anything. I mean, a lot of thought, I think, been put into this. Now, I'd like to just kind of thumb through the advanced section of the rules and just mention some of the things that come in the advanced game, because again, that basic game rules is just covering armored combat. Here we have things like leg units, towed units, aircraft commands. So there's a ton of stuff in here. We got ammo limits, a lot of different things coming here. And then also what I noticed in here too, so they take the basic game, and then in the advanced game section, they expand on the basic game's same section of the rules. So here we have advanced game sequence of play. So this is, once you've learned some of these advanced rules, this is how the sequence of play is going to be modified. And they completely explain the sequence of play And if you're playing the basic game, you've got it fully explained, and if you've got the advanced game, you've got it fully explained. Oh, and I should also mention one of the things that it talks about with these advanced rules. These advanced rules are designed to be both kind of modular and kind of drop in. So what that makes it really nice, right? Because I'm just going to kind of keep thumbing through these things too. So if you learn the basic game, you don't have to add all 40 more pages of the advanced rules. You can say, okay, now we're just going to add in some infantry squads, and let's just do that. Okay, now we're going to add in aircraft. Now we're going to add in weapons. Let's add in some of these other command phases. So this adds kind of a command structure to the units in here. And it just kind of keeps adding things in here. So I could really see you kind of playing this, learning it, and then gradually working your way through the advanced rules so that over time you've kind of built up a fully functioning system of how to play the game in its full glory and beauty. And as we can see here, just lots of different things. Indirect fire gets added in here. Lots of different ways to resolve combat at more advanced phases and stuff like that. Close combat comes in here. Hand-to-hand, I think, comes into this part. Complex terrain. Get wire, mines, pitches, smoke, all kinds of stuff shows up in here. So a fully functional combat system that you can kind of walk your way into at a very kind of manageable, however you want to make it, kind of pace. So I'm pretty excited about that because I do have to confess, when I saw 132 pages of documentation, I thought, yeah, that's going to be a pretty tough order there. Now, here is the playbook, and this is, I think we can go through this one a lot quicker. This a bunch of the information here is designed for talking about how to set up scenarios and then also how to create your own scenarios, which there's a whole value system for units and points and how you can structure that. So it allows you basically to come in and to easily kind of have a system that you could use to design your own scenarios. Because the game comes with 10 scenarios, but obviously you're going to want to play a lot of different ones. And I think that's kind of one of the really neat things about this is that they've thought through that and they've put in a whole system that you can find point totals for the forces and match them up and create some really cool scenarios. Now, the scenarios 1 through 10, they also get more complex. The first 2 scenarios here are using basic game rules. So we can see we just have armored units here. So this would be 10 Russian tanks against 11 German tanks. Likewise, this one a little bit bigger, but again, a small force of Russian tanks versus a small force of German tanks. And then as you get to scenario 3, they start to add in some more vehicles, towed guns, and infantry squads. So you start to work into the advanced rules and things like that. And then gradually these scenarios get they look to kind of stay similar till you get to some of the last ones where they get really big. And again, really elegantly organized, really easy to understand what to do, and everything here is explained so you can kind of figure out what you're doing as you go through it. In that regard. So yeah, there's the scenario book and the playbook. At the end of the playbook too, they also had this documentation was really neat. I'll show this a close-up of the first page of the German version of this one so you can see it. But these are all the different units in the game, and then these columns here, kind of flip it this way, these columns here show at what year in the war those units were likely to appear. And I think the shading here might be how common it was. I'm not really sure. I haven't learned that yet. But this would be, again, very helpful if you want to design your own scenarios, of course. So we have that. And now let's take a look at the optional rules. The optional rules, again, more rules, drop in, modular. You can add them piecemeal. You can kind of keep adding them in. I do think a couple of things that I noted in here that I thought was interesting is that, like, morale doesn't show up until an optional rule, which is interesting. And it's not like you don't have enough to do in the game, right? You've got, 68 pages of rules to maneuver, so it's not like morale's going to say, like, oh, why isn't morale added in earlier? It's just interesting because that kind of makes me think that it gave me the impression I was looking at this that a lot of really interesting concepts can get added to the game after you've mastered the advanced game. It's not, the optional rules are often kind of like fluffy things, but it doesn't appear to be that way in this game. Here we have the hidden units that I mentioned earlier, limited spotting. There was variable armor piercing penetration, so a lot of different kind of getting into the nitty gritty. Here is infantry smoke. I think it was earlier too. More on minefields, bogging down, all kinds of stuff. So just a really elegant system for really digging into that vehicle versus vehicle and small level tactical combat in World War II. So there we have it. There's all the rules. Now let's jump in and take a look at the map. And I'm going to show an overview of this because I like to do that so you can see the whole thing as well as kind of, you can see some close-ups here as we look at it. I think this was the only thing that I looked at in the game and I said, okay, that's okay. I think the map is functional. I think the map is good, but I think the map could be leveled up. I might just say that. Right? It looks like it's cool. It looks like it's going to work. And maybe maybe you've got enough going on with the counters and all the different markers you're going to be dropping off at that, a more complex map would actually make the game harder to play. So sometimes you can just have too much on a map, and it's really challenging to kind of figure out what's going on. Now this, so in that regard, I think it's a very functional map. It just was the one part that I thought, oh, it'd be kind of cool if this had a little bit more detail to it, perhaps, or something like that. But I'm sure it's going to work fine. The other thing about the map, it is one large map. It's not a tile-based system, and I do know in the expansions that they're tile systems, they're modules, so you can kind of butt them up against each other in all sorts of different ways and make different scenarios that way. So that's, I think, a kind of an improvement to the map that's in here. So maybe if you were to go off and get kind of expansions for the game, you'd end up using that tile-based modular system a lot more than you would this basic map that comes in here, because you just get the one map and you fold it out at that particular size. So let's look at the units, though. These are so cool. The top half we have the Russian tanks, and the bottom half we have German tanks, and I'll show them at a close-up here. So these are the individual vehicles again, and then one of the nice things about this is you flip them over, and these are all different units. So there's no kind of step system to these units. These are all on a whole nother level in different types of tanks in here. So you really could have, most of them are kind of out, like you have a Panzer, this is a Tiger 2, and on the other side of this one you have the Tiger 1. But you've got a lot of different vehicles in here, more than just the one set. You've got this times 2 in terms of the variety of vehicles you can bring into the game. And we'll take a look at the vehicle cards pretty soon later. But these are very elegant. They look, I think these must be an inch, perhaps even a little bit more. Must be maybe an inch. But nice big counters, good heft to them, really nice color, good information, clear, easy to read. Then we have 2 sheets here of the markers and different other counters in the game, in addition to, on this one, we have the leg units. So we have infantry units, mortar teams, things like that. And then lots of different markers you're going to be putting on the board, on the map, to be able to kind of help you manage the combat. Fire, move, overwatch, fire and move, things. And some of them, too, depending on the angle they go at. So this can be turned one way or the other to indicate different things. So fire is turned one way and move is the other. So it's a very elegant system, and again, printed on both sides. So you have other structures here to look at. So we have both parts there, and here is our second set. Again, lots of different combat markers to help you manage combat and help you manage the engagement that's going on here. These are kind of look cool. We have mines and hasty and blocks and ditches and stuff like that. I think hasty is a hasty ditch, so it's something you just dug like frantically to try to save your life. These are turrets. I'm not quite sure how these work in the game, but got them there on the second side for these doing some other things. Here's the full ditch instead of just the hasty ditch. All right, so let's take a look at some of the other components here. Lots of support for the game with player aids. So we have, this is game card A, which talks a lot about the armor-piercing AP hits and modifiers, a lot of the information for managing. Here's the terrain effects and things. So just, again, there's a lot of information that's going to be come onto this kind of gritty tactical combat game. So you're going to be looking up stuff and looking up tables and stuff and things like that quite often. I really like how this is organized and how this is put together. I mentioned this earlier too, but if you'll notice, each one of these tables has the reference to the section in the rules where you're going to find more information. So I think there's been a ton of thought put into this game system on how you're going to play it, and then kind of as you're going through and learning the game, re-reference the rules again to be able to streamline the gameplay and make sure you get things right and make sure you're having a good experience doing that. So really kudos to just how everything is so integrated and so well coordinated. This is the same thing as the other one that we just looked at. More references here. Here is our combat effects summary. Different kind of patterns as you look through. This is different kind of key rules for different situations in the game. And then the other side here, again, we have sequence of play, available commands. And a lot of these, too, again, you're going to be integrating them as you work your way through the advanced rules and then through into the optional rules. So not all of these, of course, are used for the basic game. But again, here's a whole sequence of play with cross references to the section in the rules where you can go look that up. And also, as we mentioned, which is really neat, I should mention this too. So the spotting phase, for example, we talked about how in the rules there's an advanced game spotting phase and then there's a basic game spotting phase. Look what they've done here, which is really elegant. I think they've got spotting phase 4.1 in black refers to the basic rules. Red refers to the advanced rules. And then if there's an optional rule, so for example, adjust, remove, morale, counter, step, because that where you involve morale down in here, it's 7.1 in purple. That gives you the section, the optional rules. So it tells you exactly which segment of the game you're playing as well. So just a level of detail that's just kind of remarkable, I think. This is the same as that one. Then these these next two player aids here are references for how to use the information on the vehicle and unit cards. So these basically spell out, it's an index if you would, or a way to kind of figure out, okay, what do these numbers mean on the card and how do you look them up? So I'm going to kind of just mention these quickly. They have them for all different types. So again, it's kind of a player aid for interpreting the information that are on the various player and vehicle cards that we're going to take a look at momentarily. Now this here, it's a hidden unit track and a transport and summary track. I don't quite know how these are used. This is a turn track, so I assume that's the turn for the basic game, but I don't quite know how these are used other than you're going to be putting units on them probably to bring them into the game. Here's more for aircraft, how to interpret. And then these are so cool. So you get, I think, 16 of these. Is that right? 8. Yeah, it looks like 16 of these. These are the vehicle cards, and I'll show some close-ups on these. So each different unique vehicle in the game has all of its statistics on how it's going to perform in combat. So you've got here is offensive information. You've got gunnery range, AP damage, depending upon ammunition type. And all of these numbers, of course, what you use to calculate the combat. On general purpose effectiveness, in terms of that, you've got the symbol up here, little silhouette of the vehicle. Then down below, you've got all the different defensive information, depending on whether it's kit in the front or the rear, the front side or rear side. So everything's right there at your fingertips. So if you need to know how this Panzer IV is going to perform in combat, you've got all of the details and statistics that you need. So you don't have to go looking in a rule book or anything like that to pull it all out. It's all right there. And the German tanks are on one side and the Russian tanks are on the other, as well as, if we look closely, oh, here's the Tiger 1. A lot of different information. These look so cool, because you can imagine that each one of these units is going to perform quite differently in combat. And to be able to spell it out this way, and I mean, there's a lot of detail here, right? You can really see that someone's put in a ton of thought into developing this system. Here are artillery batteries, some German artillery batteries. So, and you've got also here mortars and heavy machine guns and anti-tank weapons. So these are for the infantry units. They have all of their information there as well. Squads, half squads, and sections. Here are some aircraft cards. Then we have, last but not least, we have 4 10-sided dice, 2 white, 1 black, and 1 red. I don't quite know yet how those are. I assume I know you're generating some 1 to 100 numbers, so that's why they must be the black and red dice to kind of give you different 2-digit numbers rather than just 0 to 9 or so. And that brings us to the end. There is Panzer. I mentioned, if you watch some of the shelf tours, I spent a ton of time when I was wargaming before playing Tobruk, which was, of course, a game set tank-to-tank combat in North Africa, published by Avalon Hill a long time ago. And I love that game. Just that tank-to-tank combat game where you're trying to hit a tank in the side instead of trying to get a tank in the rear, moving around, seeing the different performance levels of the different armored units and stuff was such a fun game. And so I am excited to dig into this system. I've actually already got Panzer IV and then was kindly gifted Panzer I. So I'm very appreciated for having that come in as well. And I'm just very excited to be able to come in and play this and kind of get to look at it. So probably coming to the channel at some point in the near future. It's going to take me a little while to get through it and learn it and stuff too. But let me know what you think. Have you got the system? Do you like the system? What do you like about it? Have you got any of the expansions and things like that? Are you looking forward to the new one as you look at this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And thanks always for tuning in. That brings us to the end of this one. If you've enjoyed it, giving it a thumbs up will help get it in front of more viewers. And if you're new, please consider subscribing. It's about 40 to 50% of the content on the channel is historical gaming and wargaming. So thank you so much for tuning in. Looking forward to getting this one to the table, and we'll see you in our next episode. Bye-bye.